Welcome to the Job Hazard Analysis Training Module. This module will cover the following topics: the definition of a hazard, the definition of a job hazard analysis, the importance of the job hazard analysis process, how to perform a job hazard analysis, how to control hazards, and when to review the job hazard analysis. A hazard is defined as the potential for causing harm. This includes injuries, illnesses, deaths, and property damage. Workplaces are full of hazards: mobile equipment operating alongside pedestrians, large machinery with moving parts, toxic or flammable chemicals, and more. Every year, millions of American workers are injured, get sick, or die as a result of workplace hazards. A job hazard analysis, also known as a JHA, is a process during which people study a job in an attempt to identify hazards before they cause harm. Completing a JHA involves examining the relationship between the worker, the job the worker performs, the tools used to perform the job, and the work environment. If hazards are identified during the JHA, the next step is to try to find a way to remove or reduce the hazard. The JHA process works best when it's completed as a team effort involving employees and their employers or supervisors. Both sides have much to gain by avoiding accidents at work, and both benefit by knowing the other cares and is involved. Employees bring a special knowledge and perspective to the JHA because their work experience can help them recognize hazards others are unaware of. In a perfect world, a JHA would be performed for all jobs, no matter how big or small. If you must prioritize which jobs to perform a JHA for, it's best to do JHAs first for jobs that have high rates of injury or illness, can cause serious injuries or illnesses, even if it's never happened before, could lead to a serious injury as a result of only one simple human error, are new to a company, have recently changed, or are complex enough that they require written instructions. To begin the JHA, break a job down into the different steps or tasks involved in the job. For example, a press operator's job can be broken down into these steps. Pick up a sheet of metal from the source bin. Place and align the metal in the press. Press the cycle buttons, and remove the pressed metal and place it in the product bin. To make sure all the steps are correct, it may help to ask employees who have previously performed the same job, or even to photograph or videotape someone performing the job. Once the different steps of the job are identified, the next process of the JHA is to identify the hazards involved in each step. When looking for the hazards in each step, ask these questions: what can go wrong? What factors could contribute to something going wrong? How likely is it that something could go wrong? And, if something does go wrong, what are the consequences? Ask these questions about every step involved in performing the job. For our machine press operator, hazards include the ergonomic strain of twisting to pick up sheets over an 8-hour period, the chance of cutting a hand on the sharp edge of the metal sheet, and the potential to get a hand crushed by the press. Looking for hazards is a little like being a detective. You have to use a mixture of knowledge, experience, common sense, and creativity to anticipate hazards. Although it's impossible to list every potential hazard, Keep the following hazards related to tools or materials in mind while looking. Chemical hazards, including chemicals that are toxic, flammable, explosive, or corrosive. Electrical hazards, including shocks, short circuits, static, fires, and loss of power. Explosion hazards due to pressure differences or combustible materials. Mechanical vibration hazards, including vibrations that can cause bodily damage or damage a machine. Mechanical failure hazards that could break a machine. Hazards caused by blades and sharp objects. And radiation hazards. While looking for hazards, you should also look for hazards related to the job or work environment, including ergonomic hazards, including body strain and repetitive procedures. Fall hazards, including slips, trips, stairs, ladders, and working from heights. Extreme temperature hazards, including fire, heat, and cold. Noise hazards. Struck by hazards, in which something can strike and injure a person. Struck against hazards, in which a person can hit something. Weather hazards. Impaired visibility hazards. And excavation hazards, including soil collapses. Once the hazards of each step are identified, it's time to write up some hazard scenarios. A hazard scenario is a formulaic manner of explaining each hazard. The purpose of writing hazard scenarios is to make sure that later efforts to eliminate or reduce the hazard can address the factors that contribute to the hazard. The hazard scenario should include: where? Where does the hazard exist? Who or what? Who or what could the hazard harm? How? How is the hazard caused? Hazards are rarely the result of just one thing. Instead, they often occur after a chain of events. So, to determine how, you'll have to identify both the trigger that directly causes the hazard and the other contributing factors that lead up to it. And finally, the consequence. What is the outcome if the hazard does occur? The following is a sample hazard scenario for a machine press operator and the hazard of cutting a hand. Where? The hazard occurs in the machine press room in front of the machine. What? The sharp edge of the metal sheet can harm the operator. How? By cutting the hand of the machine operator. This is a result of the sharp edge of the metal sheet. But another contributing factor is that the operator sometimes works quickly and doesn't look closely at what he's doing. Consequences? The operator can receive a significant cut as a result, and perhaps even get an infection. Once the hazard scenarios are prepared, the next step is to think of how to control the hazards by eliminating or reducing them. To control a hazard, try the following solutions in this order. First, try to remove the hazard. An example of elimination is to replace a noisy machine with one that makes less noise. Second, use engineering controls to reduce the hazard. An example of an engineering control is to enclose the noisy machine within a sound barrier. Next, try administrative controls. An example of an administrative solution is to limit the amount of time workers can spend in a noisy area. Finally, and only as a last line of defense, use personal protective equipment, or PPE. An example of PPE is hearing protection worn in a noisy area. In many cases, one or more controls will be used together in combination. When looking for appropriate engineering, administrative, or PPE controls for a hazard, keep the following in mind for each type of control. Engineering controls include substituting processes, equipment, materials, or other factors, enclosing hazards, isolating hazards by using interlocks, machine guards, blast shields, welding curtains, or other barriers, and removing or redirecting hazards using ventilation or other means. Administrative controls include written operating procedures, safe work practices, and work permits, limiting exposure time to hazards, monitoring the use of hazardous materials, using a buddy system in which 2 or more workers work together to increase safety, and training. Use PPE under the following circumstances: while engineering controls are being developed, when engineering controls are not feasible or do not completely eliminate the hazard, when safe work practices do not provide enough additional protection, and during emergencies when engineering controls may not be possible. Once the job has been broken down into its steps, the hazards in each step have been identified, and controls have been considered, it's time to write each hazard down in a job hazard analysis form. Using the information gathered, create a form for each hazard that includes the job location, the people who performed the analysis, the date, the description of the job step, a description of the hazard, and controls intended to eliminate or reduce the hazard. Now that you know how to fill out a JHA form, here's an example. As part of his job, a press operator has to reach to grab sheets of metal from a bin and place them in the press. During the JHA, it's discovered that operators frequently cut their hands on sharp edges of the metal sheet. As a result, 3 controls intended to reduce the hazard are planned. They are an engineering control: purchase sheets with duller edges from another supplier. An administrative control: have workers take training that alerts them to the hazards of the sheet edges and the importance of using PPE. And a PPE control: have workers wear cut-resistant gloves. While performing the JHA, there may be times when a very serious hazard, or a hazard that is very likely to occur, is discovered. If this happens, correct the hazard immediately instead of going through the full job hazard analysis process. Once the hazard is corrected, you can fill out a JHA form to document the hazard and how it was controlled. It's not enough to do a JHA just once. Instead, after doing the initial JHA, it's important to review it again as time passes. JHAs should be reviewed when the job changes. There is a near miss when the hazard almost causes an accident, injury, or death. A job hazard does cause an accident, injury, or death. It's also a good idea to periodically repeat the JHA, even if none of these events occur, because sometimes hazards missed in the initial JHA are later identified and controlled. Anytime a JHA is revised, it's important that all employees affected by the changes are properly notified and trained. At times, a company may find it wise to hire a professional to help prepare the JHA. This is especially true if an employee has a job that is very complex or that includes many different tasks. Professional help can be found from insurance companies, fire departments, private safety consultants, and more. Even if a professional is brought into the process, supervisors and employees should still play a role in creating the initial JHA and reviewing the JHA when appropriate. Every workplace presents hazards. In some cases, these hazards can cause serious illnesses, injuries, or deaths. The job hazard analysis process is intended to identify and control those hazards. Supervisors and employees should work together to complete the JHA. Once the JHA is complete, be sure to put the controls in place to eliminate or reduce any hazards that were discovered.